Hello there, everybody. I want to talk to you today about one of our oldest professions, prostitution. This is it's about as old as any profession can really get, along with farming, as you know, as well as the world's other oldest profession, being a podcaster. Oh, what? You think being a podcaster isn't an old profession? Were Socrates and Plato not really podcasters? They were exactly like them, except they didn't have the giant microphones and the ads at the end that pointed you to their nutraceuticals and their boner pills. They were exactly like them. Okay, more, but more on today. What I want to talk about. I want to talk about the criminalization of prostitution and how it disproportionately affects trans women. Now, the U.S. has a long history when it comes to sex work and its legality in the 1800s to its criminalization in the 1900s. The illegalization of sex work did not stop the industry. Instead, it forced it to go underground. As such, as such, it made it more dangerous for sex workers. Prostitution is illegal in most states, and as such, it means that there is an underground market for it. Street workers are also more likely to be victimized by others. They face ongoing dangers of assault, robbery, and rape, which are less of a risk for off street workers who have not been coerced into prostitution. Prostitution is a taboo topic, and as it deals with the uncomfortable subject of sex. So societally, we have built many moralistic laws about sex. Sex is a cultural taboo, but it's something that most people want. It's something that most people do, or at least that most people want to do. You know, unless you're like a former model from Slovenia who has to look at this when you go to bed. How are we about to do this to ourselves again? Oh. So, societal institutions use cultural ideology Societal institutions use cultural ideology, the predominant ideas of values and beliefs, perceptions, and understandings that guide the behaviors of members of society, even if they do not personally subscribe to some of them. Desire and passion are human traits, as Jean-Jacques Rousseau stated that man is inherently good, but sexual desire is one of the ultimate corruptors of men. It, it is women that lead men into passions that create societal woes. This view on sex and desire is not unique to Rousseau, as Immanuel Kant voice similar his voice concerns that sex is a vice that must be avoided as the vice leads to sin and immorality. This philosophical debate over sex reflects the societal opinions on sex and sexuality. The U.S. has placed many laws involving sex and sexual material as the First Amendment, freedom of speech, and has an obscenity clause. The Comstock Law banned the sale of obscene materials from being sold, which included pornography, sexual education material, contraceptive, and any and all material that involved abortion. The taboo around sex has materialized itself in sodomy laws that were designed to illegalize non-vaginal sex. This was mostly aimed at making anal sex between men. This was mostly aimed at making anal sex between men illegal. This illegalization of gay and queer sex has made a lasting. This illegalization of gay and queer sex has had a lasting impact on U.S. history and customs involving queer identity. Transgender community is one of the most disadvantaged community. The transgender community is one of the most disadvantaged groups in the U.S., often targeted by laws that are designed to restrict access to gender affirming care, prevent them from going to the bathroom, ban them from sports, and even illegalize being called by the pronouns they identify with. And like as you know, like there have been many a video of of uh, of leaders doing stuff like this.
Well, I'm Ted Cruz, and my pronoun is kiss my ass.
You know, the idea behind calling someone by their pronouns that they identify with is to respect them and what they want to be called. So I think we showed this man the ultimate sign of respect by only calling him Mr. Kiss My Ass from here on out. And if you don't mind, I'd like to get Mr. Kiss My Ass off my computer screen right now. This ever growing issue of transphobia is not new and has a long history. During the 60s and onwards, trans people have been excluded from most social movements. During the queer liberation era, trans people were treated poorly by their gay, bisexual, and lesbian counterparts. However, it does appear that transgenders occupy the lowest stratum of the status hierarchy and generally face greater difficulties than their female or male prostitutes and generally face greater difficulties than female or male prostitutes. They have higher HIV infection rates, usually have the least desirable prostitution locations, make the least amount of money, and are stigmatized and ridiculed by cisgender male and female prostitutes. Transgender sex workers are also more likely than males to be assaulted or raped while at work. Misunderstanding of sex and sexuality has been present in the medical field as well. Misunderstanding of sex and sexuality has been present in the medical field. Famed psychologist and walking embodiment of mommy issues, Sigmund Freud once claimed that homosexuals were gay to having an anal fixation that they never got over during their development. I'm not even going to touch that. Homosexuality was, and in some places still is, considered a mental illness. Trans women are often labeled as homosexuals despite their gender identity being female. They are still only seen as men. Being transgender was a mental illness. It wasn't until recently that the actual disease that trans people suffer from, called gender dysphoria, was identified and is being treated through gender affirming care. This change in understanding is a positive that moves being transgender from a mental illness. This change in understanding is a positive that moves being transgender from being a mental illness, but still many refute this view of gender affirming care as abusive and criminal, despite medical science proving that it is effective. Queer people face adversity in workplace, school, even at home. They can be thrown out of their home by their parent, and if they're sent, they can be thrown out of their home by their parent, and if they're out of it, they can be sent to conversion therapy. When queer youth are thrown out of their home, a lot of them often have to resort to sex work to survive. You can see queer sex youth out there as young as 13 working as a sex worker. Very few call girls report that they began selling sex to support a drug habit or to support another person. Usually they began selling sex as a way to earn money so that they could become more independent. Sex workers are not protected by law as other workers are. Queer sex workers have higher rate of HIV than most. Black queer people have the highest HIV rate in the entire country. When an individual crosses multiple lanes of intersectionality, there are many opportunities for that individual to face multiple forms of oppression. Sex workers can often find themselves in a bad situation when they are facing sexual violence. If they are raped, they are unlikely to report it to the police. Even if they do, they are more likely to be arrested for sex work than the person who raped them is to face any kind of criminal prosecution. For example, transgender prisoners are 13 times more likely than their counterparts to be sexually assaulted in prison. Pose. A documentary that I highly recommend is called Paris is Burning, as well as a TV show called Pose. They depict the lives. They're about the lives of gay and they're about the lives of gay and trans youths in New York in the 1980s and 90s. In the documentary, we get to see In the documentary, we get to meet a young woman named Venus Extravaganza. Now, Venus Extravaganza was involved in ball culture and was a member of the House of Extravaganza. And during the production of Paris is Burning, she was killed. And I'm going to let her house mother, Angie Extravaganza, explain how that came to be and how that affected her personally.
I always used to tell her, Venus, you take too many chances. You're too wild with people in the streets. Something is going to happen to you. But that was Venus. She always took a chance. She always went into a stranger's cars. She always did what she wanted to get what she wanted. I had a booking for a Christmas show at Sally's, and the DTs came to me with a picture of her murdered, and they were about to cremate her because nobody had came to verify the body, and I was the one that had to give all this information down to her family. Actually, they found her dead after 4 days, strangled under a bed in a sleazy hotel in New York City.
I'm hungry.
We used to get dressed together, call each other, and say what we were going to wear. And, you know, she was like my right hand. As far as I'm concerned, I miss her. Every time I go anywhere, I miss her. That was the main daughter of my house, in other words. But that's part of life as far as being a transsexual in New York City and surviving.
That is heartbreaking. Her murder has still never been solved. And those weren't the only dangers out there for gay and trans people back then. HIV and AIDS was a huge danger back then and killed much of the gay and trans community. And AZT, one of the first HIV and AIDS drugs, weren't affordable to the general public. Like AZT drugs could cost up to $100,000 a year when adjusted to today's economy for the 1990s. And when you see all this and you put it together, it just paints a really depressing picture for the trans community, especially trans sex workers. So what can we do? There has to be a solution to this, right? Well, there is a solution to this. There's a solution to the suffering of sex workers, especially trans sex workers, especially trans. There is a solution to the suffering of sex workers and especially trans sex workers, and that's decriminalization. We need to decriminalize it. Sex workers' rights frames problemize the conceptualization of prostitution as a social problem, flipping the script by arguing that criminalization and stigma are actually the problem. If we legalize sex work, this will allow for the creation of protection for sex workers so that their livelihood is far less risky than it has to be. We have built a taboo around sex and sex work. We have built a taboo around sex and sex work, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. Legalization of sex work would help a lot of people out, and it would be a net positive for our society and the LGBTQIA+ community. The DA was formed to host a national sex workers' rights conference in 2006, the culmination of years of friendship and networks of sex workers' rights activists around the country. Existing organizations such as SWAP USA, founded in 2003, local chapters continue to emerge, and Coyote, founded in 1973, had engaged in political efforts, public awareness campaigns, and support for sex workers for decades. The DA was formed to bring together sex workers' rights activists from across the U.S. on a regular basis. Sex work is going to happen whether we like it or not. What we can do is decriminalize it and regulate it so that those in the job have safety nets and protection from the violence and harm they face every day. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. May the force be with you.